The Charizard EX League Battle Deck is out now. Congratulations to everybody that has picked one up so far. If you plan on picking one up in the future, I highly recommend it. It's the best pre-constructed deck Pokemon have ever put out. And if you don't plan on buying it, that's cool too. But today, we are looking ahead into the future and speculating on what the next League Battle Deck is going to be. I'm Jet from InThirdPerson.com. Make sure to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's take our best educated guesses on what the next League Battle Deck could be. League Battle Decks are Pokemon's competitive line of pre-constructed decks. They are the strongest decks that they have, and the Charizard League Battle Deck one is absolutely fantastic. They usually release 2 of these per year, one in the first half of the year, one in the second half of the year. The one in the second half pretty much always comes out around November, while the first half of the year can be as early as April, like we saw this past year with Gardevoir EX, but we've also seen them release really late, like July late. The most recent one is Charizard, which we've talked about here, and another defining note about League Battle Decks is that they contain exactly 6 holo foil cards, as you can see in the picture here. This one has 3 Charizard EX, 2 Pidgeots, and 1 Prime Catcher Ace Spec. Of course, the configuration is going to vary from deck to deck, but a League Battle Deck has to have 6 holo foil cards in it. Narrowing down candidates for the next League Battle Deck isn't actually that difficult, because there are some criteria that really whittles down the list. Usually it takes about 8 months from a deck to debut in the Pokemon TCG before it ends up in a League Battle Deck. Just the way that production works out and planning, it takes about minimum 8 months, and sometimes it's over a year before they end up in a League Battle Deck. So if you're looking for one of the hot new decks right now, like a Ceruledge or Archaludon, maybe Pikachu, those are not going to be in the League Battle Deck just yet, this upcoming one anyway. And it is a deck that's already in the meta right now. It's just not one of the new ones. And also keep in mind, it's not going to have any F block cards. So any sort of V-Star Pokemon or pretty much all of the remaining yellow border cards in standard play are not going to be there. We're not going to get a League Battle Deck for Regidrago or Palkia, Arceus, or Lugia at this point in time. So between all of those sort of legacy Pokemon going away and also having to keep in mind rotation and what lead times look like for production, it's a pretty small window of potential decks. Basically anything from like Scarlet and Violet up to say Stellar Crown is something that could end up in a League Battle Deck. With all of that out of the way, let's get to my predictions for what I think will be the top candidates for the next League Battle Deck. Now, just full disclosure, I have no inside information on what Big Pikachu is thinking here. I'm just using the my intuition as someone who's followed League Battle Decks for years now on what is likely to be in the League Battle Deck. They oftentimes pick hyper-competitive decks and all of that other criteria aside, I think using all of that information, we can make some best guesses. And I think there are 2 primary candidates for this upcoming spring League Battle Deck drop. I think the most likely League Battle Deck to come out this spring is Raging Bolt EX, and this is the version with Teal Mask Ogerpon, and I think that it has an incredibly strong case for being the next League Battle Deck. It's one of the strongest decks in 2024. Like, its resume is ridiculous. 21 regional top 8 finishes, 2 international top 8 finishes. We've got 6 wins in total there. It's one of the most popular decks in 2024. If you look at online play, the Limitless charts, Raging Bolt is one of the most popular decks, if not the most popular deck that was played in the last calendar year. And it loses relatively few cards in the upcoming rotation. Yes, we're going to lose stuff like Radiant Greninja and Switch Card and Pokestop, but it's not the end of the world for Raging Bolt. Its core of Raging Bolt, Ogerpon, Professor Zada's Vitality, a lot of the core pieces you will need to make Raging Bolt work will continue to carry over into the following year, and I have a hard time seeing Raging Bolt fall that much farther out of the tier list that it wouldn't be a prime candidate for a League Battle Deck. And one of the best things about Raging Bolt is that it's one of the easiest competitive decks to play. It has a very straightforward game plan. You are just attaching a whole bunch of energy and smashing the active really hard, so I think it makes this a perfect candidate for the League Battle Decks, where you're oftentimes trying to get people who are just getting into competitive play, and I think this is a phenomenal place for those players to start with their first competitive deck. I'm not going to try and cherry pick the cards, like every single card that could be in the deck, because we don't know where Pokemon is going to go with the exact build, especially when they're considering post-rotation builds of Raging Bolt EX, but we can speculate on the holo foil cards. Again, we have to have exactly 6 of them. And my preferred configuration for a hypothetical Raging Bolt deck is 3 Raging Bolt, 2 Ogerpon, and 1 Prime Catcher. Based on past precedent with Charizard, I think that any League battle deck going forward is going to have an A-Spec based on, just where competitive is at right now. A-Specs are in every single deck, and I think you have 5 Pokemon and then 1 EX card, or one sort of A-Spec card. And so I like having 3 of the Raging Bolt as your primary attacker, 2 Ogerpon, and then just 1 Prime Catcher. You're only allowed to have 1 A-Spec per deck. Prime Catcher is the A-Spec for Raging Bolt EX. So when you're upgrading this, you just got to add 1 more Raging Bolt and 1 more Ogerpon, and you're good. Yes, there are some other EX cards you could consider here as well, like Pheasantipity and Squawkabilly EX. So we have some other configurations to try and squeeze those in there. In this example here, we've got 2 copies of Raging Bolt instead of 3 to make room for that 1 Pheasantipity EX. We could also go with 2 copies of Raging Bolt and then put Squawkabilly in that Pheasantipity spot. I would love to have Pheasantipity or Squawkabilly. I think preferred Pheasantipity in this spot, but I don't necessarily think it's worth cutting out a Raging Bolt in order to get an extra Pheasantipity or a Squawkabilly EX. Yes, Pheasantipity is probably going to, by the time you watch this video, Pheasantipity is probably still more expensive than Raging Bolt EX, but I think for the person that is just learning how to play the game, and this is my first deck, and I'm probably going to play it to some sort of competitive level without making upgrades yet, I think the configuration with 3 Raging Bolts is best. So I would still stick with this sort of 3-2-1. But if there is room, then yeah, I would cut 1 Raging Bolt to make room for a Pheasantipity EX and maybe even a Squawkabilly. While I do have Dragapult EX as my number 2, I very well could see this being the deck for the spring of 2024. Dragapult EX, despite its slow start at the beginning, has become one of the strongest decks in the game. It's got multiple top 8 finishes and wins in regional championships and international championships. I feel like we have finally cracked the code on how to make a good Dragapult deck by itself, and it's incredibly strong. Dragapult EX is also a big selling point in that it's one of the more popular modern Pokemon that Pokemon uses to market their stuff all the time. And I think it changes very little to rotation, whether you're playing it with Dusknoir or Pidgeot. Pretty much all of its cards are Scarlet and Violet era. Yes, you're missing out on stuff like Rotom and Lumineon, but that's not that big of a deal, especially since all the other decks are losing those cards too. Dragapult, I think, is in a very good spot to potentially get that League battle deck spot. The only thing that is putting it down here below Raging Bolt for me is that Dragapult is one of the harder decks to pilot, and I think that, and that, not to say that that's a factor per se in what decks Pokemon picks. Gardevoir EX this past year is arguably one of the hardest decks to play, and Pokemon still picked it, partially because it's a fantastic deck, partially because Gardevoir is a very popular Pokemon. So maybe Dragapult gets the nod over Raging Bolt because I think Dragapult is probably a more popular Pokemon than Raging Bolt. But either way, whether we're going Raging Bolt or Dragapult here, I think these are your 2 clear contenders for that spring League battle deck spot. Not going to mess around too much with configurations here. I think it's a pretty straightforward response here. I think 3 copies of Dragapult EX is perfect. I think because we can squeeze in the Pheasantipity EX, we should. Sparkling Crystal is going to be our A-Spec of choice here, making Phantom Dive a lot easier to pull off. And then we're going with 1 Pidgeot here to round things out. We do have to have 6 holo foil cards in the deck, and I know a lot of Dragapult lists aren't running Pidgeot anymore, but for the sake of getting a extra EX in here, I would rather have 1 Pidgeot than have 4 Dragapults, which you definitely don't need. And if you want to run Pidgeot here, great. If not, you can just take it out and then put something else in its place. Terapagos EX would be a great choice, but I don't see it being as favored for that spring slot as Dragapult or Raging Bolt EX. It is one of the stronger decks in 2024, and it had multiple top 8 finishes at regional championships this year. And Terapagos is one of the feature Pokemon in the Scarlet and Violet era, in case marketing is a factor here for Pokemon. The big problem with Terapagos EX is that this is going to have to come out post-rotation, and Double Turbo Energy is going to be going away, which is the primary way that people are playing Terapagos EX right now. Now, there's a ton of support for making Terapagos work without Double Turbo Energy in terms of Glass Trumpet and Crispin. There's a lot of ways to accelerate energy to Terapagos outside of Double Turbo Energy, but right now, just in the competitive circles, that's not the way people are playing it. So I'm curious to see what a Terapagos EX deck would look like without the Double Turbo Energy, which I think is going to put this a little lower on the list versus the other two, but I still think Terapagos EX is a great choice. This first potential configuration is pretty straightforward. We've got the 3 Terapagos EX as our attackers. We've got 2 copies of Pidgeot and then a Prime Catcher for gusting. If we want to get a little greedy here, I think you could cut one of the Pidgeots and make room for Pheasantipede EX. There are some competitive Terapagos lists that only run 1 Pidgeot anyway, so it's not necessarily the worst idea to trim the Pidgeot line a little bit if it means we get a Pheasantipede EX as well, which is just a phenomenal card in basically any deck. So what you'll see with all these lists, I'm trying to squeeze Pheasantipede anywhere I can. Here's one more that gets really greedy. If we cut the Terapagos line down to 2, you could potentially make room for Pidgeot, Pheasantipede, Prime Catcher, then either Squawkabilly or Ursaluna, trying to give you a well-rounded package from beginning to end. I'm not sure I like cutting Terapagos down to 2, and I'm not sure which one I would pick, but I'd probably pick Ursaluna over Squawkabilly, but Squawkabilly is fantastic. I think this list is trying to do a bit too much, and I don't know if Pokemon wants 5 different Pokemon on the box. Well, 4 Pokemon plus an ace spec. I think they would probably want the primary Pokemon to be 3, but then again, it's not unprecedented for them to go 2. The Mew VMAX deck had 2 Mew V, 2 Mew VMAX, 2 Genesect. So going down to 2 of your primary attacker is not unprecedented, and in theory, a lineup like this, and sorry for the Franken Squawkaluna here, but you understand, it could be one of these 2. This is theoretically possible, but unlikely. Now we're digging pretty deep into the potential possibilities here. I think this one has a slim chance of happening, but I don't want to completely rule it out because I do think there is a case for Roaring Moon as a League Battle deck. It has been a consistent competitor in the tournament scene, literally got runner-up at the World Championships, and depending on how you look at it, it could have won the World Championships. In particular, that final matchup against Iron Thorns EX, I think Roaring Moon is favored in that matchup, but things just didn't work out. So Roaring Moon could have been a World Championship deck. Regardless, even outside of that, it has a number of regional top 8 finishes and international top 8 finishes. This has been a very strong deck. And yes, right now in the Dusk Noir era, Roaring Moon maybe not the best play, but it has been a deck that is very strong. And it also features one of the big Pokemon from the Scarlet and Violet era. I'm not going to go into spoilers on what that means in context of the video games, but in the Pokemon TCG world, Roaring Moon has done very well. And there is a case for Roaring Moon having its own League Battle deck. I think the big gotcha here is that Dark Patch going away is going to be a problem for Roaring Moon. Not being able to accelerate all of that energy will be a problem, but it's not like you can't fully get around it. There are ways of accelerating energy, getting around that. I think E-Switch could be something where you Sada's Vitality to 2 ancient Pokemon, and then you E-Switch 1 energy off to the 1 in the active, or what have you. I don't necessarily think it is game over for Roaring Moon once rotation hits, but it does have more question marks than the other builds here. So this is going to sit lower on the list, but it's still on the list. If I were building a Roaring Moon League Battle deck, I think I would lean towards a build like this, where you get your 3 Roaring Moons as your attackers, squeeze in Squawkabilly and Pheasantipede as support Pokemon, and then 1 copy of Prime Catcher. You could also switch out the Squawkabilly and put Pecharunt EX there for that free pivot. I think I would probably go with the Squawkabilly EX in terms of like what are the essential building blocks. I think that Pecharunt is a really nice to have, and if you're looking strictly from prices, Pecharunt Petrarun EX is going to be more expensive and a better get in the box than a Squawkabilly EX, but for the purposes of setting up the deck and which one should you have first, I think that the Squawkabilly would be the better fit here. If you want to get really greedy, you can cut the Roaring Moon line down to 2 and then squeeze Petrarun and Squawkabilly in there. But again, to me, this feels like a little too thin of a lineup. Yes, you are getting the fundamental pieces, but having only 2 of your primary attacker does feel kind of odd. Not unprecedented for Pokemon to do something like this, but I personally would prefer a build that had 3 Roaring Moon EX in it. One deck that we cannot rule out here is Iron Thorns EX. Yes, it's a bit of a weird deck in that it only has 4 EXs and you need to have 6 holofoil Pokemon in here, which does make things weird. However, we can't rule this out because it is the reigning World Championship deck. It is the one that won Worlds. Yes, it's already going to get its World Championship deck, but as a League Battle deck, it's not necessarily the worst choice either. It is probably the easiest meta deck to learn to play. But we are going to have to squeeze in some extra holofoil cards to complete the list. And another factor in play here is that it loses double turbo energy. So not entirely sure what Iron Thorns looks like post-rotation, but it certainly has the resume to make it a potential pick for this League Battle deck. I personally like Iron Thorns as a quad Thorns deck, so I would go with the 4 Iron Thorns, 1 Prime Catcher. You could put in Legacy Energy or some other A-Spec in here as well, and then throw in an Iron Crown for a little extra bonus damage, just so you can say that you've got the 6 holofoil cards. And yes, Iron Crown does give Iron Thorns a little bit of extra punch with that ability that boosts damage. If we wanted to make it more of a quote-unquote future box deck, you could cut the Iron Thorns line down to 3 and then go with 2 Iron Thorns and a Prime Catcher to make it a little more of a well-rounded deck. I personally love Quad Thorns as a deck, and then the Iron Crown would be extra. But if we're going this route for a League Battle deck, I don't necessarily hate this either. However, I think Iron Thorns might be better as a Deluxe Battle deck, where it's only 3 holofoil cards, and then you get 3 Iron Thorns EX, and you don't have to worry about squeezing in some extra Iron Crowns just to fill out the box. I don't necessarily know if it's the best pick for a Deluxe Battle deck, because its ability is pretty oppressive for beginner to intermediate level players to deal with on the other end. But Iron Thorns as a deck with 3 holofoil cards, I think, is ultimately a better fit than for 4. So if we were doing a Deluxe Battle deck list, I think Iron Thorns EX would be a cool choice. Last on our list, and I think it has an outside shot, but I think it does have a shot, it's Gholdengo EX. It has multiple top 8 finishes in big tournaments, and it seems to come out of nowhere every now and then, but it's been doing that for about a year now. It has a phenomenal attack. It's one of the more popular Pokemon in the Scarlet and Violet era, and I think it would make for a great deck in the League Battle deck line. I actually think it's better suited as a Deluxe Battle deck, where you just have to give players 3 Gholdengo EX and you're good, but we could round this out to 6 holofoil cards if needed. So outside chance here, I think its power level is a little lower than where I would like it to be for a League Battle deck, especially considering the other contenders on this list, but I do think Gholdengo has an outside chance, and again, I think this is the perfect candidate for a Deluxe Battle deck instead. But if we were building a League Battle deck, I would build something like this. You go with 4 Gholdengo EX, giving you maximum number of attackers and maximum draw power with that coin bonus ability. Throw in a Pheasantipity EX and to help draw cards. And then you could go a number of ways with the A-Spec, whether it is Hyper Aroma to evolve your Gimme Ghouls to Gholdengos. It could be Prime Catcher for that gusting. Could even be the new Energy Search Pro, which has been creating some buzz in the competitive scene for Gholdengo EX. Maybe this is going to be the new A-Spec of choice for Gholdengo. I have yet to try it yet, but I've seen some pretty good results with it from other people using Energy Search Pro. So keep your eyes on this channel. I'm probably going to do an Energy Search Pro build of Gholdengo and cover it, and maybe that's the way Pokemon goes if they were to make a League Battle deck for Gholdengo EX. those are my predictions for what I think the next League Battle deck could be. Again, this would be coming out between April to June/July of 2025. I think there are two serious contenders in Raging Bolt EX and Dragapult EX, and I would lean towards Raging Bolt being the #1 most likely candidate for it. But if it was Dragapult, I'd be fine with that, and that also makes a lot of sense. The other ones I threw out there are a bit more of a reach, but I do think that there is a valid argument to make for each of those decks, even if that argument is like really thin. Like, I don't think anyone is clamoring for an Iron Thorns or a Goldengo deck over Raging Bolt or Dragapult, but I do think that there is at the very least an argument there for those archetypes to get the League Battle deck treatment. But what say you? What do you want to see in a League Battle deck? Let me know in the comments below. But for now, I gotta get going. Thank you so much for watching. You can find me on all the things: YouTube, TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at @InThirdPerson. You can find me on Twitch at @InThirdPerson, where I stream the Pokemon trading card game every Sunday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. And check out the website, inthirdperson.com, for more articles and videos on video games, board games, and other nerdy pursuits. So until the next one, I'll see you later. Bye-bye.